manifestation of everything that have happened, transpired over the past 2 months or so. I'm grateful that we have a mayor who is touched with the things that affect the people of the incorporated village of Hempstead, and who is at the point, not as just at the helm as a leader, but he also understands the need to provide support, to provide information, to provide those avenues that can have the greatest impact on the next generation. Would you put your hands together and receive Mayor Donald J. Ryan of the Incorporated Village of Hempstead. He comes with our official greeting.
Thank you, Dr. Gates. Good evening, everybody. On behalf of the Village of Hempstead and our trustees and the entire community, I do bring greetings. I thank you for all being here today. It's an important event, and I look forward to some success for sure. It's an easy answer to me. I think what we need is alternatives and presence. When you look at the schools and realize the job they do during the day, educating our young people, what about if we were open at night as well, all of the schools? Not just the gym, though that's a healthy activity, but classrooms for studying, library, computer rooms, and presence, our presence with love and understanding that can make tomorrow a better day. People with a vision and an advocacy. That's what we need. Money's important, but let me say this to you in closing. Rings and jewels are not gifts. They're merely imitations of gifts. The only true gift is the giving of thyself, and therein lies the answer. God bless everybody. Thank you.
Thank Mayor Ryan. I also want to acknowledge two of our village trustees who are here with us. Our trustee Charles Renfro, here, village trustee, and our trustee Lamont Johnson in the rear. Also, before I acknowledge Mr. Reginald Pope, who's going to take us further, I want to acknowledge Mr. Lieutenant Lonnie Johnson, Jr. of the Hempstead Police Department. Lieutenant Johnson, and four fine men from the Nassau County Police Department who are here in our presence. I want them to stand as well. I am going to decrease at this time. I'm going to ask you, would you receive my friend, Mr. Reginald Pope, senior year. Mr. Reginald Pope.
Thank you, Bishop, for such an eloquent introduction. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for the Incorporated Village of Hempstead for having us. And thank you, the panel, for showing up and giving us the support and convey your opinion. My name is E. Reginald Pope Sr., and I'm the president of the Nassau County chapter of the National Action Network. I had received a number of calls in regards to this forum stating, well, why isn't the formerly incarcerated here or ex-offenders? You must understand, just like there is a car that comes out as a new model, there's always going to be flaws. But this is just the beginning to establish an open dialogue and engage in discourse in regards to this matter in the community, and to see how we could curtail this issue. Thank you very much, and I would like to introduce Mr. Marcellus Morris.
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody that came and showed up. Second, my name is Marcellus Morris, and I represent the Coalition Against Youth and Gang Violence. For this topic today, I think the answers are right here in this room. There's so much power, so much influence, and so much that we can do if we're able to work together. What happens a lot of times, we have these meetings and these forums, and then we break apart. Working with Dr. Gates, Ms. Anthony, and other principals around the school, I started to notice if we just are able to come together, we can make a difference. I've been in this field for 10 years, but what I used to do when the kids come to my office, and they used to always ask me for dollars, so I give them dollars. But then I started saying I'm gonna make them earn their dollars. So what I started doing was, I start making them write what they would do if they can go back to the 5th grade. So I'm gonna read what one of the young people said. One thing I would change if I could go back to the 5th grade is the people I hung out with. One are things your friends isn't supposed to do is put you in any harm or drama that should show you who your real friends are. I did 16 months for a so-called friend of mine. Didn't get not one letter from him or none of that. Another thing I would change is gangbanging. This, I'm pardon the language that he wrote, but I'm just gonna read it how he wrote it. Would change is gangbanging. This shit fucked my whole life up. I gotta watch my back everywhere I go. I can't just go out and have fun because at any time I can get shot, jumped, or stabbed. It's a lot that come with this, including either life in jail or death. I'm going to end like this. You're a man before anything. Don't try to fit in. Be yourself. Girls like men with a future, not men in a jumpsuit. Quite a few people know who this individual is, and his name is Xavier Moore. And if you know Xavier Moore, you would never know for him to write something like this. What happened eventually, Xavier Moore, we pinpointed Xavier Moore maybe in the 6th grade. We knew where he was headed, and eventually he headed there. He's in Nassau County right now, facing a body. He probably will beat it. Truthfully, I'm not a judge or jury, and I'm not sure, but I think he's going to beat it because I don't think he's the one that did it, but that's just my opinion. So he's coming back out, still on a path maybe of vengeance or on a path of destruction if we, and that means all of us, if we as a community don't galvanize and have a plan for him when he comes out, because everybody knows when you plan to fail or fail to plan, they go right back to the same situation. Peace, I love y'all, I hope we can do some good work.
Okay, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator, Alma Carrie Yawson.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I am so grateful to see all of you here today, assembled for the sake of saving our children and making sure that they become the highest manifestations of themselves as human beings, despite the forces that would act against them. My name is Alma Yawson, and I am a Freeport resident. I am an attorney. I went to Harvard undergrad before going to UPenn Law School and worked for business school. I'm also an author. My books are in the back. And additionally, I'm an educator, and I recently ran for office. I ran for the office of Comptroller of Nassau County. So again, thank you so much for being here. So why are we here today? We're here today to discuss the school to prison pipeline, which I often refer to as the preschool to prison pipeline during the various programs that I do. I'm a vendor to Nassau BOCES, the Department of Education, Suffolk BOCES, and I do various professional development on topics sometimes surrounding this, as well as culturally responsive education and bullying prevention. So, as you all will remember from history, in about 1865, the 13th Amendment was passed, which basically outlawed slavery. But this was the caveat, and this is an important caveat. The caveat was that slavery or involuntary servitude could occur again if the person was convicted, duly convicted, I should say, of a crime. And so the way the powers that be would have it is that you could just find people, convict them of a crime, and then engage in slavery again, basically, and have them become slaves. And so what happened here? At the turn of the century, we had chain gangs, but unfortunately, it continues to evolve and evolve and evolve. And with the prison industrial complex, a system in which you actually have private corporations running prisons, and in some cases, states mandated to fill a certain number of beds in the prison, we have the demand for prisoners. And who do you believe will be the most vulnerable people to become those prisoners? Us, the poor, people of color, Hispanic people, immigrants of all different nationalities, those are the people who are most vulnerable, whether it's because of their economic situation or because of their lack of political sway, to become the victims of that. Now, how is it perpetuated? So we no longer have de jure racism, right, of law. It doesn't say you're black, go to jail, right? You're Hispanic, go to jail. You're a member of the LGBT community, go to jail. You have what we call de facto segregation and de facto policies that basically target certain communities. So in some cases, it's drug laws, which will penalize certain drugs that are more prevalent in the African American community and give harsher sentences to people selling those drugs. That could be a mannerism in which you would have disproportionate amounts of vulnerable people or people from vulnerable communities entering the system of mass incarceration and becoming the source of profit for major corporations that benefit from prison labor. So that's just to give you some background on the prison aspect. But we're here to discuss the school aspect. How do schools become a funnel for that pipeline? Whether it is because of failing schools that simply are not preparing our young people to compete in a global economy. They may be leaving high school unable to read and write sufficiently so that they can get high-paying jobs. That could be a part of the funnel. You may have a curriculum that doesn't show themselves in a positive light and leaves them victims to stereotype threat and portrayals of them as gangbangers. That could funnel them into the prison system. There are various ways, and thankfully we have a very wonderful panel of people who will explain these various forces to us. I'd like to introduce some of the panelists, and I would like the panelists to kindly stand up as I read a very short bio. Marnie Hazelton. Marnie Hazelton is the Roosevelt Union Free School District Superintendent. She started her career, clap, 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 thank you. She started her career as a substitute teacher in 1996, and with continued hard work, dedication, and innovation, she was named superintendent in 2016 in a 4-0 vote. So everyone voted for her, right? During her time, the district has improved significantly as Ms. Hazelton has pioneered many programs, such as a partnership with Nassau Community College to test students' educational needs and deficits so that they could get support in math and reading and become college ready. Additionally, the district has hired more bilingual teachers and administrators to greater support the district's 44% of families who identify as Hispanic. The one struggling district, oh, it's 62%. Okay, well, that was 2016. Times change quite fast. The one struggling district is now in good standing with the state's Department of Education. Let's give a round to Superintendent. Next, we have Mayor Andrew Hardwick, please. He is the former mayor of Freeport and a former Freeport Police Commissioner. He served in the armies for 10 years and is an ex-captain of the Freeport Fire Department. He is also the former Deputy Commissioner for Operations for Nassau County Parks and Recreation, where he's responsible for public safety of park ranger officers. And he is currently the Administrator for Safety for the Hempstead Union Free School District. Can we please give Mayor Hardwick a big round of applause? Keith Saunders, please. Mr. Keith Saunders earned an associate degree in liberal arts from Nassau Community College and a bachelor's degree in Africana Studies from Stony Brook University. His master's degree is in elementary education and administrative certification. He earned that at the New York Institute of Technology. His education has provided him with a career in education in which he has served so many school districts, people: Roosevelt, Hempstead, Malvern, and Bellport. For the past 7 years, he has served as the Dean of Academic Services of Uniondale High School. Can we give Mr. Saunders a big round of applause? Kevin Sattersfield, Esquire, please. Kevin Sattersfield is an attorney at law, admitted to the New York State Bar in 1996. He graduated from John Jay College of Criminal Justice with a bachelor's degree in political science and master's degree in criminal justice. He also graduated with a law degree from the Thurgood Marshall School of Law out of Texas Southern University. In Houston, Texas, He was an assistant district attorney for 10 years in Suffolk County, and for 10 years until recently he was employed by the New York City Department of Corrections as an agency attorney tasked with developing policies to drive down violence and corruption on Rikers Island. Can we give him a big round of applause?
For 10 years, I was a criminal defense attorney, and my office was in Hempstead.
Perfect. Thank you. Erica Anthony, please. Erica, affectionately known as Sunshine Anthony, is a licensed social worker with a master's degree from Fordham University. Erica has a strong commitment in servicing the needs of disadvantaged youth and their families. For example, she's experienced working with adolescents who have been runaways or homeless. She formerly coordinated the Street Outreach Project for the Long Island Crisis Center. Can we please give her a big round of applause? And next we have Ms. Candace Benjamin. What we do know about her, God bless her, is that she's the Assistant Regional Director for the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. Now, the Queens and Long Island region, so that's huge. Now, what does her division do? The New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision's mission is to enhance public safety by providing treatment services in safe facilities where needs are addressed in preparation for reentry, followed by supportive services under community supervision for reducing recidivism. That's when people go back to jail. Can we please give her a big round of applause? So there is another person, Brother Ujima. Do we have Nikhil available? Is he there? Can I introduce him? Not yet. Okay, well, I'll give his bio. Nikhil Goyal is a PhD candidate in Sociology of Education at the University of Cambridge. He's the author of the book Schools on Trial, which was published by Random House in 2016. And he's appeared on MSNBC and Fox. He's written for the New York Times, MSNBC again, The Nation, and other publications. Goyal has also had speaking engagements with the Clinton Global Initiative University, Google, Stanford, Cambridge, and the Lego Foundation, among others. In 2013, he was named to the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. He is also recipient of the 2013 Freedom Flame Award. Goyal holds a Master of Philosophy in Education from the University of Cambridge. Please give him a round. He's all the way in Cambridge, but he deserves our love. So Gerald S. Carter is the son of a father who hailed from British Guyana and a maternal grandmother from Panama. In 1970, Judge Carter entered Fisk University, a historically black college in Nashville, Tennessee, where he played varsity baseball. During his senior year, he served as student body president and graduated cum laude in 1974, majoring in history. Judge Carter was scouted by various Major League Baseball teams. However, he acceded to his father's wishes and pursued a legal career over a baseball career. He attended his father's alma mater, which Howard University School of Law, where he excelled in criminal law, winning the Jurisprudence Criminal Procedure Award. He graduated number 6 in his class of 126 students. He was elected to the county court bench in November of 1997, and he was also appointed an acting Supreme Court justice and was re-elected in November of 2017. And I'm saying this as myself. We hope he will be re-elected in 2017. He's running for office, so please remember his name, Judge Gerald Carter. Can we give him a big round of applause? Perfect. Okay, so now we are going to begin the panel. Now, the first question was for Nikhil in Cambridge. My first question to him was, what is the school-to-prison pipeline? What are its causes? And how can we engage in change from political level? Full disclosure, Nikhil is a friend of mine, and I know he's very into politics. He helped me with my campaign. God bless him.
Hi, my name is Nikhil Goyal. Unfortunately, I couldn't be with all of you last night at the School to Prison Pipeline Forum. The technology, unfortunately, wasn't working. But I did want to share with you some of my remarks as we think about these issues for the future. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Cambridge. I'm studying sociology of education and I'm the author of the book Schools on Trial, How Freedom and Creativity Can Fix Our Educational Malpractice. And a lot of my research and work has been examining issues in public education and the criminal justice system. And I want to thank Reggie, Marcellus, Ujima, the Village of Hempstead, and Amistad Long Island Black Bar Association for hosting this incredibly important forum. I wanted to begin my remarks by giving some historical context for the issues of mass incarceration and the school-to-prison pipeline. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this history, but I wanted to lay the foundation for this discussion. There are two cancers at the heart of our nation's founding: the genocide of indigenous people and the enslavement and genocide of Africans. Throughout our history, we've made half attempts at chemotherapy, but have never gone in and fully removed these tumors. Thus, they remain with us, seen most starkly in our prison and education systems. Chattel slavery existed from 1619 to 1865 when the 13th Amendment was ratified, which abolished slavery except as punishment for a crime. Slavery as an institution has never truly been eradicated. It has merely evolved into new forms. In the 19th century, convict leasing was introduced. As a result of the passage of black codes in Southern legislatures, African Americans were punished, fined, and incarcerated for offenses such as vagrancy, mischief, and insulting gestures. Unable to pay off their debts, they were sold off as forced laborers to corporations and plantations. They were brutally exploited and many were killed. Convict leasing was not officially abolished until 1928. Then there was the Jim Crow regime of lynchings, more than 4,000 in the southern states between 1877 and 1950. And how can we forget the crimes committed by the northern states? When black Southerners arrived in the North and Midwest during the Great Migration, they were confined in ghettos by scores of racist policies sanctioned by governments and banks, and the threat of violence if they so dared to break the color barrier. Racially restrictive covenants, racial zoning, redlining by the Federal Housing Administration, Veterans Administration, and the banks, blockbusting, panic peddling, exclusionary zoning, and subprime mortgage lending. These policies did not come about by accident. They were deliberate. It's the reason why we have such a large racial wealth gap in this country. Sociologist Lloyd Quant argues that there are four peculiar institutions in American history. Three I've discussed: chattel slavery, Jim Crow, the ghetto, and the fourth is hyperincarceration. So I am not exaggerating when I say that the black experience in the United States has been a never-ending reign of racial terrorism. We kidnapped millions of Africans. We enslaved, murdered, torched, lynched, starved, pillaged, and unjustly incarcerated black people and their communities. Remember Black Wall Street, Emmett Till, the Birmingham church bombing, Selma, the 1985 MOVE bombing by the police in Philadelphia, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, and the list goes on and on. In the 1970s, the tough on crime era began. This included mandatory minimum sentencing, truth in sentencing laws, the war on drugs, and prosecutors filing more felony charges. The incarcerated population has catapulted from 300,000 in the late 1970s to 2.2 million. Even though the United States has 5% of the world's population, we lock up 25% of the world's total prison population. As the New Yorker explains, there are more black men in the grip of the criminal justice system, in prison, on probation, or on parole than were in slavery. Overall, there are now more people under correctional supervision in America, more than 6 million than were in the Gulag under Stalin at its height. The war on drugs, even as President Nixon's own domestic policy chief admitted in his final years to Harper's Magazine, began for the express purpose of locking up blacks and hippies. He told writer Dan Baum, by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. The locking up of blacks in mass was not an unfortunate side effect. It was the entire purpose. As anyone who has studied the so-called war on drugs honestly will tell you, it is not a failure. It is and was one of the most successful racist, terror campaigns in the history of the world. And we know that there are devastating consequences for people who have had a criminal record: voter disenfranchisement, denial of federal housing, education, and welfare benefits, and employment discrimination. Now, some will argue that the growing incarceration rates were the result of rising crime, and that is not the case. As Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote, imprisonment rates actually fell from the 1960s through the early 1970s, even as violent crime increased. From the mid-1970s to the late 1980s, both imprisonment rates and violent crimes rates rose. Then, from the early 1990s to the present, violent crime rates fell while imprisonment rates increased. So what we have is a criminal justice system that holds the lives of dogs in higher value than people of color. This is the same system that put Michael Vick away for 2 years for dogfighting and a young black man named Khalif Browder for 3 years at Rikers Island for allegedly stealing a backpack, while letting police officers go unpunished, from Darren Wilson, the officer who killed Michael Brown in Ferguson, who hasn't spent a second behind bars, and Daniel Pantaleo, the officer who killed Eric Garner, who not only kept his job, but got a pay raise. This is the same system that puts poor and working class black and brown people in Hempstead, Uniondale, Roosevelt, Lakeview, Westbury, and Freeport in jail for minor drug offenses, while white kids in Garden City, Great Neck, and Roslyn are not arrested, or they're given a ride home. Now, punitive practices have expanded into public schools. Since the 1994 Gun-Free Schools Act under President Clinton and the 1999 Columbine High School Massacre, zero-tolerance disciplinary policies have become the norm in many public schools across the United States, especially urban districts. Metal detectors, body cameras, security cameras, and police officers surveil and control the student population. Minor infractions getting criminalized, and this has led to an explosion in the number of suspensions and expulsions. In 1974, 1.7 million students were suspended, or 3.7% of the student population. In 2011, nearly 3.5 million were suspended, or 7%. This percentage has doubled. African American and Latino students have been disproportionately suspended and expelled, leading many to eventually drop out, and this has fueled the school-to-prison pipeline. The school-to-prison pipeline is a result of several policies. Zero tolerance is one. Another is high-stakes standardized testing. Research has shown that high-stakes testing can lead to student disengagement and boredom, causing them to drop out. And in some schools, students who are low performers are pushed out, since there is enormous pressure put on schools and teachers to perform or risk facing sanctions, state takeover, or closure. The research is clear. Zero-tolerance disciplinary policies are punitive and ineffective. A much more humane approach is moving towards portfolio-based assessment and restorative justice practices, which, according to Edutopia, bring people together harmed with people responsible for harm in a safe and respectful space, promoting dialogue, accountability, and a stronger sense of community. Now, what this is about is conflict resolution, healing and rehabilitation, and addressing root causes. Restorative justice has been implemented in schools in New Zealand, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York City, and many other cities. And the evidence is clear. If implemented well, they are extremely effective. They dramatically reduce suspension rates, increase graduation rates, and improve school climate. Now, two more quick examples. What did Columbine High School do after the school shooting in 1999? They didn't put up metal detectors, they hired counselors. In Philadelphia, Memphis Street Academy got rid of its metal detectors and barred windows. It started focusing on conflict resolution, student empowerment, relationship building, and anger management. Violence dropped 90% in 1 year. So to sum up, we need a cradle-to-grave agenda, rebuilding our communities by fighting for economic, political, racial, and social justice. This means creating millions of living wage jobs, Medicare for all, universal health care, affordable housing, food security, equitable funding of public education and youth services, criminal justice reform, and dismantling systemic racism at every level. and this will result in a decent standard of living and economic security for all people. We cannot heal the wounds of racial injustice until we have a genuine national reckoning with our history of racial terror and atone for the original sin of 250 years of slavery. Until that happens, tragedies like Charlottesville and Charleston will continue to happen. But this does not need to be our destiny. As civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer once said, "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." We stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, from W.B. Du Bois to Malcolm X, to Martin Luther King, to James Baldwin, to Ella Baker. And if we stand up, and we fight, and we refuse to let them divide us by race, by gender, by sexual orientation, by citizenship status, we can create a decent, equitable, anti-racist, and just world that we're proud to pass along to future generations. So thank you so much for your time. I look forward to working with you on tackling these critical issues affecting our communities. And I appreciate your work, and thank you again to my fellow panel members and the organizers of this very, very important forum. Thank you.
My name is Kevin Satterfield, and I wanted to address the historical and philosophical underpinnings of the school-to-prison pipeline. And that was a wonderful historical overview. But I want to get more specific, because when you talk about the school-to-prison pipeline, it is definitely race-specific to Black and Hispanic youth, and mostly Black. And the scholarship is showing that Black girls, the dramatic increase of Black girls being caught up in the school-to-prison pipeline. I believe many of us in this room have seen the photos of a Black girl in a classroom, and a white police officer tossed her out of the chair, out of her chair, and arrested her. And then the female student who was recording the incident, she got arrested also. So, but in terms of the historical and philosophical underpinning, I got to get more specific, because when we leave here, I need everyone to understand, to appreciate why we are in this mess that we're in. And it's called the Dred Scott decision that was rendered in 1857. And let me read you the quote, because this quote governs the historical and philosophical underpinning and behavior as relates to our Black students today. They had for more than a century before been regarded as a being of an inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race, either in social or political relations, and so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit. Now, you have to understand that quote and how it impacts on our African American youth, because the central goal of the school-to-prison pipeline is to break the back and bodies and spirit of our Black youth so they will be compliant to an apartheid America which seeks to dehumanize them and speaks to crush their spirit, and making sure that they do not rise up in opposition of America's apartheid culture. And so that's what I wanted to drive.
Thank you, we appreciate that. Lawyer Satterfield gave us great background as well, and mentioned to us an important aspect, which is education being a tool of maintaining apartheid in America. And I would like Ms. Hazelton to kindly address this because of the great progress she's made in Roosevelt. So in your experience, what are the reforms that schools can make in order to ensure that students are prepared to be leaders and change agents in this global economy? 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Ms. Lawson, and thank you for all the organizers. 2 minutes, I can't name you. Thank you for inviting me, and pardon my voice. I'm a little under the weather, but this was a very important forum for me to participate. I have been involved in breaking and disrupting the school-to-prison pipeline since I was a teacher in Bedford-Stuyvesant. For 5 years, I was a New York City teaching fellow, and I taught in one of the bottom 40, one of the worst performing schools in New York City. So I have seen firsthand the impact of an inferior education and what it does to a community. And as a teacher, I was the first and the last line of defense when it came to discipline, the disciplining of my students. And that is the core problem. We have adults in the school system who are afraid of children. They want to suspend, send to the office, send to the principal, send to the dean. That is not the answer, and it's not going to work. One of the major problems as far as discipline is concerned in the schools and in the classrooms, lack of motivation and lack of student engagement. Students are not engaged, they're bored, they're disinterested, and they're not motivated. Henceforth, you have disruption in your class. That's one of many. We also have to address social and emotional issues going on inside the homes. We cannot suspend away the problems of the home. As superintendent, I have kickback suspensions for students in first and second grade. It is unconscionable to me to suspend a second grader. Obviously, there are problems that are going on in the home and they need to be addressed. I recently completed my dissertation for my doctorate at Hofstra University, and it was based on project-based learning. How do we engage and motivate our students? And that is putting the learning back into the hands of students. And this summer, as I wrap it up, I have brought the community into this conversation. I thank you to my 2 board members and my director of grants who have joined me this evening. But this summer we took a community field trip into Manhattan to watch an off-Broadway show called Pipeline at Lincoln Center. And it addressed the school to prison pipeline, which is now called restorative justice, because if you hear that term in the news media, some of our surrounding districts are now starting to address this issue because of the opiate crisis. When the black community had the crack and marijuana issue, we would suspend, and heroin, and we would suspend and arrest that problem away. Now you have children in these well-performing, high-end districts, and their children are ODing in school and at home, and so now we have a mental health crisis versus a criminal.
So we're over the 2 minutes. We have to thank future Dr. Hazelton. But
No, not future. Yes. I'm done.
Oh, let me pay the respect. Current Dr. Hazelton. Thank you very much. Throw some respect on it, right? So now, but we don't want to leave here. We come, we talk all the time, and education is good, but education and applied knowledge is better. So I want us to discuss some of the takeaways from Dr. Hazelton. We have one, the need for better teachers, period. She says that as a teacher, she was at the front line of the school to prison pipeline. She was, she felt she was the only line. She was what separated them from this pipeline. So one, recruitment of better, higher performing teachers. Training, absolutely. She said 2, we need to address the social and emotional issues at home. So children are not in a vacuum. When you have children coming to school, they don't have, they didn't eat breakfast that morning, they don't have a stable family, they didn't get enough sleep, they could be dealing with homelessness and being in shelters and moving back and forth. They bring all of that into the classroom. So what I hear from you is that we need political will and community will in addressing social and emotional issues of children even before they get into the classroom. So it has to be a dispersed and a complete community effort. And then 3, I hear the curriculum has to change to include more project-based learning so that students are fully engaged and not feeling bored, disinterested, and therefore unmotivated to perform. Those are the 3 takeaways. Do you want anything else to add as we leave with our takeaways?
Just one more.
One more. Sure.
As a country, as we move to legalize marijuana, I am perplexed that we're still criminalizing marijuana, and that I have to suspend students when they bring small amounts of weed. And I'm not encouraging that,
Sure.
but there is a fine line between incarceration and receiving some type of assistance in breaking that addiction. And if the students are at home getting high with their parents, how am I going to combat them getting high before they come to school?
Okay, so we've added that fourth, which is the legalization of marijuana, and she kind of touched on this again, that when you have the crack epidemic, the entire culture was throw them in jail, these are bad people. Now with the opiate addiction, which is taking on a different hue, a different economic background, you have all this compassion. I believe Dr. Hazelton is advocating for compassion in general, for all people regardless of hue, so we appreciate that. Next, Mayor Hardwick, please. So you are a school safety, you are a director, a leader with respect to school safety. How can school safety officers adequately respond to issues such as school scuffles in a manner that does not contribute to the school to prison pipeline?
Good evening, everyone. Well, first of all, I think that it's imperative that safety officers be properly trained. Training is essential. Even though this is an ongoing epidemic that we're facing, proper training and professionalism has not been in the workplace, in the schools, in that respect for a long time. In many cases, school districts are just getting active in that regard, with the understanding that it takes more than just hiring someone that has a license and putting them at an entrance and say, do the job. Because people are coming without the training, and the training is essential. And I'm happy to say that we do a lot of it. And it's a part of the policy now in our school district, but there's never enough training. I mean, training needs to go on because the world's changing, we've got to change with it. People have got to be more adapt to the use of smart devices. You know, for example, an officer can't be walking around with a flip phone thinking that he can keep up with the kids in the middle school that have the best. And we have to also understand that gang activity in any school district is business activity. It's a business.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, I think Mayor Hardwick deserves a round of applause. We appreciate his response.
Can I address that issue about training
You want
for
to
a
add it?
second?
Sure, please.
Yeah, because whether you're talking about school resource officers or you talk about police, the issue of training always comes up. And I'm always perplexed because whether we talk about a police academy, which is a 6 months training, or school resource officers training, district attorney's office training, and you get your firearms training, you get your curriculum training, but you know what training you don't get as a general rule, and this is the problem? You don't get the training, the psychological training and screening for racism. So you can have all the training in terms of shooting firearms and police science and flip phone versus iPhone, but if you don't screen and teach for racial bias, you will always have the problem that we have. And that's why we continue to have the problem, because it's not about training if you don't teach, instruct, and eliminate those who have racial animus towards African American. And so that's central in terms of training. The fashionable term now is called implicit bias training. So if you don't have implicit bias training, whether it's in the district attorney's office or with school resource officers or with police officers, you're always going to have the racial disparity in terms of arrest, discipline, incarceration, and just general treatment of African American youth, because you are bringing into the system those who have racial animus towards African American youth. And yes, they have firearms training, they did your curriculum training, but you didn't highlight and single out and eliminate that person who has racial animus towards African American youth. So that portion of training to highlight and educate on racism has to be central to training, and as a general rule, that is not the case in America.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Let's give him a big round of applause. So, I engage in implicit bias training and training surrounding microaggressions, so I'm here for you as a resource. I would like to piggyback on that by adding a study that was done regarding bias and police officers. So police officers were given a game, and the game said, if the quote-unquote offender or suspect has a knife or gun, shoot. If the suspect does not have a knife or gun, don't shoot. So they did do this game to police officers of various races. Guess what the most common mistake was? If a black person did not have a gun or knife, they somehow saw a gun or knife and shot. If a white person had a gun or knife, they somehow didn't see it and did not shoot. Those were the most common mistake, and this is the most troubling aspect of it. It did not vary based on the race of the officer. It did not vary based on the race of the officer. We, unfortunately, as human beings, are creatures of sensory input. It doesn't matter what the input is. It's not, oh, this input is nice. It's not. If you consistently see on the news images of black people, and this is a proven fact, then the news will show you a criminal's picture more often if that criminal is black. Moreover, they will give a description that says black male, 5'10", 200 pounds, but when it's a white person, they just say white male. When you, pardon me, they don't say white male, they just say male. They don't add the color. They don't add that. So when you are constantly bombarded with these images on the news, when you're hearing these descriptions on radio, regardless of your own color, you are often affected by it. And so I agree with you. That's why I'm in the industry. You would like to add something, please?
Yes, I would. In addition to the implicit bias training, you have to factor in, I don't know if you can hear me, you can't ignore trauma. Everybody has some level of trauma that they deal with. And it's very difficult for any individual to separate that trauma from their interactions with people unless there is a conscious effort and unless they acknowledge that they're bringing this trauma to the table. And trauma can show itself in many different forms, whether or not you were the victim of a crime, whether you were bullied in school, whether you were tormented because someone thought that you didn't rise to the level of what the standard of beauty is. Whatever your trauma is, it infiltrates every aspect of your interactions if you don't tap into it. And I think it's not just police officers, it's our teachers, it's everybody that has the capacity to impact you. Whether you're standing on a line in a supermarket, if that cashier is trauma, you'll be on the receiving end of it at some point. So we can't dismiss the importance and the value that trauma has in terms of people dealing with people.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. That's a very phenomenal point. Thank you so much. You wanted to add something.
Thank you. I just want to add to that. First, I want to back up and say that I started my early workings at Hempstead High School, and I was a security guard. That was my alma mater, and that's where I found my true passion. I developed that much needed rapport with some of the students, recognizing that their struggles were similar to the struggles that I had. I was encouraged by a social worker at the school who later encouraged me to go back, and I got my master's degree from Fordham University. What I wanted to say is currently, because it wasn't, I know my bio was cut short, but currently I am the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative Coordinator for Nassau County, and I work on a county and a state level. What I do for the county is try to find alternatives to detention, and I work for the probation department. I'm also on a partnership for youth justice in Albany. And one of the tasks that I have is running a racial and ethnic disparities subcommittee, along with my JDAI collaborative. That is a very passionate thing for me, and this is how I guess I ended up here today. But in that, what we do is we do look at data that we get from the state, and it shows the disproportionate disparities in our juvenile detention system. I am housed at the detention center over in Westbury, so I get to see all of the kids that walk in our door. And it is disheartening that most of the kids that do walk in our door look like me and come from our community. One of the things that I'm tasked with, and I think somebody said it's not happening, but one of the things that we're doing is also in my racial and ethnic disparities training is having a training for everyone who joined the subcommittee. We have to have those hard conversations, those uncomfortable conversations. In our last training, I and several other of us walked out crying. So if we don't have these conversations about race and the disparities, and we're not talking about the policies and procedures that are affecting our communities, none of this stuff is going to change, and we have to work together.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, so I want to summarize before we move on to the next question. And so it seems it's, I'm sorry, yes, please.
Good evening, everyone. In reference to the trauma, a lot of us are not dealing with, for example, if you was in the military, what do they call it? Post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Our kids in our neighborhoods are experiencing so much violence every day to and from school. I can't even tell you the number of students that I've had who've now deceased as a result of gunshots. I just lost 3 students in a year and 5 days being murdered in the community after 11 o'clock at night on the weekend. And the impact is more so for those students and teachers of those students, as well as their families. As we know, it's no secret in our community, we don't seek counseling because we perceive it to be taboo. We keep everything private, like grandma used to say, keep everything in-house, don't air your dirty laundry. But in order to get help, you gotta air your dirty laundry. But what the problem is, we depend too much on the schools to fix it. Because, for example, in my district, we have over 2,400 students in the high school alone. But we only have 2 counselors and 2 social workers. It is impossible to address the social and emotional needs of our youth if we don't have the specialists present. We do have an outside agency, but that's not enough to deal with the social and emotional needs of our youth. So be advised, if you're in the military, it's PSD. But when you're a regular student who have to deal with this every day, it got to a point where we noticed that some of our students are numb because they see it so often, the death and destruction at the hands of their peers. Because every student that I've lost, there is another student who's been arrested for that crime. So we lose 2.
Yeah, same time.
So just be mindful of that.
Perfect. So I want us to make sure people, we're not leaving here just, oh, we heard some information. We have to have some takeaways and some action items. So in addition to what Dr. Hazelton told us about making sure that teachers are well trained and that they're recruited and they're motivated and that we have a variety of community-based services to deal with social and emotional needs, we make sure they're engaging in project-based learning, and we're advocating for the legalization of marijuana. From what Mayor Hardwick said. Oh, okay, oops, I'm advocating for that. But we're just making sure. Okay, we're making sure that students are not over penalized for marijuana. Let me make sure I say it right. But Mayor Hardwick is letting us know that we need to also make sure that our security officers, those who are interfacing with students, and it's been broadened to all people interfacing with students, are receiving de-escalation training so that they know what to do, and it's not going to, they're not entering the prison pipeline. Additionally, we want to make sure that they're having implicit bias training and that they also are experiencing their own counseling so that their traumas are being unwound and being healed so that they are able to more properly interface with students. So now I want to turn to Mr. Keith Saunders, please. So this is a study. The name of the study, in case any of you want to look at it, is Teacher, Race, and School Discipline. It's by Lindsay Constance and Cassandra Hart, Dr. Cassandra Hart. These are the findings. We find consistent evidence that North Carolina students are less likely to be removed from school as punishment when they and their teachers are the same race. This effect is driven almost entirely by Black students. especially black boys, who are markedly less likely to be subjected to exclusionary discipline when taught by black teachers. There is little evidence of any benefit for white students of being matched with white teachers. So because of your extensive experience at various school districts and what many of us see in Long Island with respect to districts that may be nearly 100% black and Hispanic, but the teachers could be 80% non-black and Hispanic, and we easily, right? Easily. 90%, right? So we were even going to increase it. So we see this in schools in Long Island. I mean, Roosevelt School, we can say it about Roosevelt, we can say it about Freak, we can say it about so many districts. You have had the benefit of working at various school districts as in various capacities, and you are a black man. What would you say to school districts with respect to their needs to diversify their teacher bodies, and how exactly can we increase the number of teachers that reflect the actual community of students?
Well, during my 24-year career as a black man who stands 6'5", and sometimes bald head, sometimes not, it's intimidating. And with that being said, what I've noticed in my career, what annoys me, is when we hire, not that they're not capable, but when you hire 5 feet tall females who are scared to death of that 6'2" 8th grader with braids or with a bald head, and it's the fear factor. And what I've learned is the nepotism, because in every district I've been in, this one is the son of this one, who's a brother of that one, who's a nephew of this one, who's the spouse of the other one. And they all come from the same community, which is not our community. So we have an influx, I call them interlopers, who continually come into the community, rape the community of the benefits, because now there was a standard once upon a time where when you come in, regardless of your ethnicity, you had to do extracurricular activities, you had to earn your way. Now they come in with a sense of entitlement. I don't have to do anything. And the union sometimes backs that behavior and they expect to get tenure. Tenure is a monster within itself. Now let's be clear. Don't get the impression that because the person is black, that they love our children either. Or if they're Latino, that they love our children either. So be clear, because I've seen some phenomenal Caucasian teachers, I've seen some phenomenal Latino teachers, because it's about understanding where you are when you're there. Not coming in with your own pre-biased behaviors and thought process and inject your morals and values on other people. So, and we have our own accountability with that as well. Because when you go to a board meeting, it's maybe the same 25 people over and over again. So the accountability is not there. You don't have a right to complain about the current structure and condition of things if you're not actively involved in parent-teacher conferences, you're not actively involved with the student or with the Board of Education, and you only come up not because your child is failing, but because the teacher took away the cell phone. If I want to get you there, take the phone. I spent $800 for that phone. And it will be there. Take a hat. I spent $40 on a hat. They will show up. And one last note, because I know it's a 2-minute time restriction. Be advised that the students who are at risk are not just a stereotypical at-risk student who may come from a single-parent household, daddy may be incarcerated. No, it's from those households who mommy and daddy are gainfully employed, college educated, they have to pay taxes of $8,000 to $20,000 to live on Long Island. They're working an extreme amount of hours. They substitute things because they can afford it because they never had it when they was a kid, instead of giving their child time and love. So when you substitute things for time and love, that child is now have the time to roam them streets because you don't get home till 6 o'clock. So that hour between 3 and 6 is when all heck breaks loose. And now they've connected with an element, and that lifestyle is fun. And those other kids are connected with them because they can hang out at your house because you have food, you have Xbox, you have TV, it's warm, and they befriend your child because they have the life, your child has the life that they want. And meanwhile, they convince your child to want their life. So it's bait and switch, like Eddie Murphy, trading places.
Okay, thank you. But I want to make sure, people, we're not leaving here without action items. So Valley Stream School District, there was a recent article about how they said they were having so much trouble, such a hard time recruiting diverse teachers. What do we now, this seems hard for me to believe, because guess what? The highest percentage of African Americans who have PhDs, guess what field they have those PhDs in?
Education.
And you all know the deal. So I'm looking at this article. This was maybe 5 weeks ago, thinking, what is the disconnect? So you said, okay, one, we as parents and community members have to go to school board meetings and demand that please tell us, what are we to do to make sure that these diverse teachers are let in?
If you look back in our history, during the movements of the 60s, Black Liberation Army, Black Panther Party, we ended up doing it for ourselves. The Black Panthers took the initiative and said, okay, we're going to demand that you provide Black history, Negro history at the time. You're going to demand Negro history in school. And we had to demand it, we had to fight for it. At Howard University, all Black institution, they had to fight to wear afros to school. So there was a spirit of activism. And that spirit of activism, we was determined because of the movement and the circumstances of the time. And guess what? That time is now with 45 in office. If we're not motivated now with 45, those who know who 45 is, I refuse to use his name, but when you deal with 45, if that doesn't wake you up to address the needs within our own community, because unfortunately, I'm putting it out there, you may not like what I'm about to say, but Black people, we need to be motivated externally. We need open enemies sometimes that to push you in the proper direction that needs to go to make you uncomfortable.
Please ask.
Yes, I'd just like to mention a couple of points. And that's why I opened up quoting the Dred Scott decision when you talked about the fear of the young Black male in the school. Historically, in present day America, the Black body as being free is the ultimate fear of white America. That's why you have the school to prison pipeline. That's why you had 244 years of slavery. That's why you had 100 years of Jim Crow America. That's why you have mass incarceration. That's why you have the school to jail pipeline. Is because the Black body being free, unchained, is anathema to America. It's America's greatest fear. So the way she deals with that fear is to break the body, to break the spirit, to break that energy and enthusiasm so you become compliant to the system. And so that's why it's important to put this in historical context. It always goes back to slavery. Now, the issue about the Black teachers, less than 2% of the teachers in America are African American males. We also have a quiet pandemic that's been going on across this country for years now. And it's really happening in Chicago, centralized in Chicago, but sweeping across America. Across America, tens of thousands of Black public school teachers are being fired because the public schools are being closed and converted to charter schools. And these charter schools are not hiring African American teachers. So when you say, what can we do about it? Let me just draw you an analogy. They say in terms of the tech industry. Well, the reason why we don't hire more Black engineers and computer scientists is because we can't find any. But the studies show that Blacks or African Americans graduate with degrees in computer science at twice the rate that they're being hired, which tells you that the pipeline is there, but they're not being hired because, as I said, racial animus. So the question isn't how do we get more Blacks to become teachers and get PhDs in education or in computer science. Yes, I know, it's a rhetorical question. The focus has to be on making sure that these white companies and charter schools hire Blacks. But once again, to hire Black is to hire a free Black body in the system that is America's worst fear. So the ultimate question becomes, how do we get these white institutions to hire in mass numbers, not just in 1 and 2, in these systems? And that's the great question.
Okay, well, I think we're going to have to continue on this because I'm not sure whether I'm not sure whether I have the concrete action item, but I think we're getting close.
I have an action item for you.
Well, tell me the action item, please. Tell me.
I participate in hiring and recruiting, the recruitment of teachers.
Yes.
3/4 of the teachers in the United States are women. 3/4 of the administrators are men. It's not just a black or white issue, it is a gender issue. I was invited to the White House under 44 to participate in their diversity. This is President Obama, to participate in their diversity summit, the Department of Education. And the question, why do we have such a hard time recruiting not only male teachers, but male teachers of color, black and Hispanic teachers? A lot of your black men in college, they're not majoring in education because of economics. And when they do enter into education, they leave the classroom with the quickness to become principals, deans, and super administrators because that is where the money is. And then when you talk about Long Island, when it is so expensive to live here, you're not going to have a lot of men of color going into the classroom. Mm-hmm. So we are working to, Dr. Von Chervaux, I saw her earlier. We work with Dr. Von Chervaux at Adelphi University to put student teachers into our schools with the end game to hire them. Love her student teachers, but I believe about 98% of them are young white women. We have worked with Hofstra, we've worked with Adelphi to form a partnership with these teacher preparation institutes to find these. You're looking at me like
I'm shocked. I'm really shocked. I'm like, how are 98%? I mean, this is making
sense. They're not in college. They're not going into the field of education.
Well,
so that is
arts degrees and then go into teaching, right?
A lot of who?
A lot of human beings have history, etc.
But when you're talking about college-educated black men and women, they're not necessarily going into the field of education, with teaching being such a low-paying position. And once they get into teaching, they look to ascend to administration, and that leaves the void.
Okay, well maybe we need an organization which will be a pipeline, because I still am feeling a disconnect, because I know so many young people graduating with liberal arts degrees trying to find jobs, any jobs, and so I'm still a little bit...
They won't teach, and you don't want someone who becomes a teacher because they need a job. That's part of the problem.
Okay. Yes. All right, well, everyone here, some of you have college-age students. I want you to know and let it be known that you are forewarned that we are hoping to recruit more teachers of colors. And so we would hope that you would tell your college-age students, your recent grads, to potentially look at it as a career option. And the resources in the room, you all hopefully have the flyer. We know Dr. Hazelton, we know all these people here. Professor, I may say your name wrong.
Von Chervaux.
Dr. Von Chervaux. Please stand up.
And Dr. Von Chervaux, I currently have at least 5 vacant teaching positions in my district that I cannot fill. And part of the problem, I need bilingual teachers.
Okay.
Not necessarily, I need bilingual teachers.
All right, we're going to figure this out. Trust me. Okay, so, yes, please.
Just a really quick point. I just want to caution, we're talking about the different industries where you're saying white companies don't hire. But when we send that message to our children, we're not sending the message that you need to expand your vision to own these companies and develop these companies so that you can hire and build up our communities. So I think we have to be very careful in limiting where we look and what industries we say don't want to hire us, because our youth are notorious for knocking down doors, and they're usually the root of activism, and they should be encouraged. and
Okay.
take that same spirit of activism
Yeah.
to create and develop new jobs so
Yeah.
that they can reach back.
Yeah.
and
But
pull
remember,
somebody
the
else up.
two are not mutually exclusive. You can deal with the reality of white intransigence of hiring blacks, but also develop black entrepreneurial spirit.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that entrepreneurial spirit should also seep into education. So I have not done this myself yet, but I'm on a number of Facebook groups for black homeschoolers. Dr. Samora Kamara, I'm trying to remember his name, is a pioneer in this academy in Brooklyn. There are a number of African-centered private schools, as well as a few charter schools. Cultural Arts Academy in Brooklyn is one of my clients. That school's phenomenal. It's an offshoot of Christian Cultural Center, CCC. So entrepreneurship and education can translate into private institutions as well as charter schools, and we need to explore all options at this point. I want to move to Ms. Erica Anthony. So as a social worker, what do you believe are the causes of student misbehavior, absenteeism, and dropouts, and how can these issues be addressed without potentially funneling students into the preschool to prison pipeline?
I honestly think a lot of people already answered that question. One of the things that I did want to piggyback on is not only do we need black people in the school system, but coming from the law enforcement, we also need them there. And I'm saying this because just like we want to see each other when we go into the classroom, we want to see them when we're on the streets. We want to know that the black person is protecting us. We want to see people from our communities that may understand where we're coming from. I think it's the same aspect about what's going on in the schools. I went to SUNY Old Westbury College to do a brief talking with some of the students, and I asked them, you know, how many of you all are interested in becoming police officers? They looked at me like I was crazy. And most of the kids do. But I said to them, and you go into the communities and you don't see anyone who looks like you. And we're afraid, and we're being discriminated against. But how would it look if you were that cop? How would you then treat your community? Giving them something else to look at, even in the probation department, where we have over, I want to say 200, 300 probation officers. We have one black female and one black male supervisor in Nassau County. So I'm just saying that we have to encourage the young people coming up that they have to start looking into entities that they weren't usually going to look into, and although that they have negative aspects, we can change that, because if we become those people in those positions will always be looked down upon.
Absolutely, I appreciate that comment. Thank you so much. So now for our esteemed Judge Gerald Carter, most of this program has focused on making sure they're not entering your courtroom. We've been discussing how to change education, how to reform education, how to better train police officers and safety officers, how to better train teachers and make sure that they're healing from trauma and they're not struggling with implicit bias, which leads our young people getting into your courtroom. But once they are there, please tell the parents and educators in the room what we can do and what we should do to make sure that they are not ensnared in the prison system once they have been charged.
Let me start off by saying this. I've heard a lot of conversation about what happens in school and why school doesn't work for some students, why school does work for others. Actually, I didn't hear that. But school is a breeding ground in a lot of ways. It could be a breeding ground for excellence. It could be a breeding ground for social exchange. It also could be a breeding ground to learn how to be antisocial. And the question that I get put in, and any judge that's here gets put in, is what happens when all those programs and all those theories fall apart, and that child winds up in front of me. Now, the perception about the court is that it's part of the pipeline, so to speak. How many people here have heard of ADP? Anybody heard of that? Yeah. Let me get props out. Judge Sharon Gianelli, African-American district court judge at the time, was tapped by Anthony Morano, our administrative judge, to create an adolescent diversion program. And what that does is to say that because you're 16 or 17 in New York State up until recently, you could be charged as an adult and prosecuted as an adult. Now what the ADP does is to take those 16 and 17-year-olds and say, look, they are not adults. They should not be housed with adults. We should find a bunch of programs to identify what their problem is and then assist them with those programs. So what Judge Gianelli did was she contacted all 57 school district superintendents. She contacted the commissioner of police. She contacted the district attorney's office. She contacted probation. She contacted social services. She got this entire panoply of services and organizations. And she created this program from scratch. It did not exist up until about 4 or 5 years ago. And what she got from the district attorney at the time, which was Kathleen Rice, after a great big fight, was to say that she would be able to decide who those kids were. So in Nassau County, contrary to popular belief, if you're 16 or 17 and you're not facing a violent felony offense, you're presumed to be eligible for the adolescent diversion program. Now what happens in that program? In that program, what occurs is that if they identify you have a drug problem, you go to a drug counseling center. You take toxicology. Your case is marked off calendar. And when you complete that program, assuming that you complete it successfully, you do not have a criminal record. Your case oftentimes is dismissed. The other thing that program does is it brings in a family dynamic. This kid may have a problem with their parents. And in order for that kid to survive and succeed, that family has to be brought in. So we don't necessarily look at it from the standpoint that we're automatically sending these kids in. As a matter of fact, if your kid is in front of me at 16 or 17, that person has somehow failed out of that program or has committed a violent felony offense. Now what happens if in fact that child has committed a violent felony offense? Do they necessarily have to have a criminal record? Answer is no. Anybody here have youthful offender treatment? Okay. Youthful offender treatment means that if you commit a crime, you're 16 or 17 years old, even though that would put you in jail upstate for years, what could happen is that your attorney makes an application, your criminal conviction is adjudicated. It's vacated, you get an adjudication. So that if you go forward, you can say, I've never been convicted of a crime. It also reduces the amount of felony time that you have to do. For example, if you're charged with a Class B felony and say it's a violent felony, that could send you upstate for 25 years, mandatory minimum 5. If I, as a judge, give you youthful offender, that decreases the time to 1 1/3 to 4 years maximum. I also have the option of giving you probation or some mixture thereof. In short, the game doesn't end just because you come into the system. We also have programs beyond and post-conviction. For example, if you have a drug problem, we have drug diversion court now. And that's on the same principle, that if you complete that program, you do not necessarily have to get a felony. You also have programs that are designed for domestic violence abusers. All right? So we have a whole slew of programs that are available to folks once they get into the system, per se. Our main focus, though, is when you're 16 or 17, we want to divert you from that system if we possibly can. Now, if you mess up, I can't help you then. All right?
I just want to piggyback and tell you what we do for the younger population. So at the Juvenile Detention Center, we house kids up to age 16 years old. So What we do differently from even Suffolk County is that when a kid is arrested in Nassau County, we have a system called an FCAT, which is a Family Court Appearance Ticket. That can be issued from the police department or from our probation department. If the police do not issue an FCAT, it's similar to an ROR for adults, that kid is brought to the detention center. That kid is not automatically staying there. We have probation on call till midnight on weekdays and from 8 a.m. to midnight on weekends. Probation department comes out, they interview the kid, and they determine whether or not, if it's a misdemeanor crime, if that kid can go home. We also have a program which diverts, and it's an alternative to detention. And what we look at is ways that we can get this kid to never go in front of a judge. During that time, like Judge Carter said, this is a family effort. We bring the family in with the kid, we interview them, we see what needs the family needs. One of the things that I see is that we automatically place families with programs, but we don't have a lot of grassroots programs that we depend on. I sit in a lot of rooms, and unlike this one, I am the only one of my persuasion. So it's kind of difficult to speak to probation, to speak to everyone else about knowing that what the grassroots can be a difference for these families. You know, they get placed in with some of the programs that may not understand all of the aspects of what's going on. So in my collaborative, I encourage a lot of the grassroots, a lot of the programs to come in so we can now divert those families to programs in their neighborhoods, in their areas that may be able to help them, and we're not failing these kids. What we're trying to do is not to have them go in front of the judge. So if they could complete that program, they can never go in front of the judge, and their case is then closed. So that's what we're doing on the lower end of things.
Okay, perfect. So I hope you all have taken note of some of those programs, some of the ones that Judge Carter mentioned, in case your child or a loved one or a young person you know finds himself facing the criminal justice system, especially if that person is 16 or 17 years old. ADP, we're asking for youthful offender treatment, and as well their drug diversion programs, which all will mitigate that child's sentence. Yes.
Let me just add one other thing. The governor just signed the raise the age law, which now mandates sort of like ADP, except it's codified now. And what happens is that if you're 16 or 17, you automatically go into the family court structure, so to speak. If you're 18, you're going to come into our system, but you could be diverted back over. All right. One thing that I think there's two things I'd like to raise too. Number one of the things that is not addressed in this entire conversation is what happens to the guy or the young lady that commits the stupid act. We can't do anything for them. They go upstate, they come back out, and they lead a productive life. But they can't get a viable job because they have a felony record.
Right. Thank you.
What we have to do, Trish, you didn't hear me say this, Judge Farrell's out there. What we have to do as a community and as a county and as a state, we have to get a way to expunge records from people who do not commit violent felony offenses. When I have a young man who was 19 and broke into his next door neighbor's house for Xbox, and because the district attorney's office couldn't reduce it below a felony, and this guy goes to the Marine Corps and goes into Iraq and comes back, and he writes me a letter, I can't get a job. The Marine Corps took him, but an employer won't hire him. We have what's known as a certificate of release from civil disability. It means absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. We now have a sealing provision that if you stay out of jail for 10 years, we'll seal it. But that still means that the employer can get it. We need expungement. So when you have these legislators and state representatives and governors and all these other folks coming through, ask them about expungement. Georgia has expungement. That's a red state. They have expungement. We don't.
Thank you, Judge Carter. Okay, I've been told that we need to wrap up. I want to make sure that every panelist has at least one question that is addressed to him or her. Next, we have Ms. Candace Benjamin. Judge Carter kind of touched on this, please. So this was my next question. So once a young person has found him or herself ensnared in the mass incarceration system, in the school to prison pipeline, and actually finds him or herself in jail, what can we as a community, as family members, as citizens do to make sure that that person can live a productive life once released?
That's a loaded question, but one of the things is having a community that's willing to embrace them when they come back. That's one of the biggest hindrances that they face is kind of being not excommunicated almost, but there's a trust factor. Oftentimes they burn bridges and the families don't trust and they're in fear. When they come out onto community supervision or parole supervision, now you're introducing into the family's lives a law enforcement component that they didn't necessarily sign up for. They feel that it's intrusive, and at some levels it is. However, we still need for them to be willing to work to rebuild these children because they're broken. Although the certificate of relief, yes, it may not have a lot of validity, but it does restore some bars. One thing that I would remove some bars that may have been placed on them. In New York City limits, there's a law that's been enacted called like the Second Chance Act that would be great if it could extend outward to the island. What that means is if you've been convicted of a crime and you go to apply for a job, that question of a conviction shouldn't be on the application. They have to offer you a job, and at that point, and only at that point, can they talk to you about your conviction. But it cannot be, you cannot be barred from a job just solely on the basis of your conviction. The law states that your conviction must be directly related to the job that you're applying for. So, for example, if you're a bank robber, yeah, they may have some issues if you decide that you want to apply for it. And rightfully so. But it's with the Second Chance Act, they cannot address your conviction until such time as they make a formal offer to you for a job. And if they turn around and deny you a job, they have to give you that in writing, and you have the right to go to the Human Rights Commission and challenge that. And oftentimes those challenges, if they are found to be legitimate, not only do they have to go back to that company, and the company has to be addressed, there's sometimes some financial compensation that goes along with it. So it's kind of forcing these employers to take a second look and look at the person for who's being presented in front of them. The other thing is when these children or young adults come back home, we have to we really have to take effort in having honest conversations, setting standards, and having expectations. When I talk to a lot of the young people that I encounter in the course of my job, some of the things that they say is, nobody cares about me. You know, if I do, I do. If I don't, that's fine too. They don't feel any sense of connectedness oftentimes. They feel like they've disappointed their family and there's no way to bridge that gap.
Thank you. I'm sorry to cut you off, but some of the audience members are dying to ask questions. I just want one more question from Mr. Satterfield about what are the legal and political changes that we should be advocating for. In the panel, we've heard one, we're advocating for second chance in Nassau County. Additionally, we are advocating that records be expunged for people who committed non-violent felonies in their youth. Is there anything you wish to add to that, please?
1 minute.
If there's at least a dozen, but I'll address one. And that goes to the notion of school to jail pipeline and expanding the notion of what school to jail pipeline means. And if we talk about one area that we should advocate for, it's Title IX. Now let me explain what Title IX is. It's probably top 5 most powerful laws in the country. Title IX says that every academic institution that receives federal monies cannot discriminate on the basis of gender. And if you look at the explosion in the success rate of young white girls and young white women in schools, on college campuses, and in the workforce, it's because of Title IX, because monies and resources have been flooded into white school districts that elevate the academic and athletic prowess of white girls and young white women. Title IX is pretty much a nullity, meaning it doesn't exist in Black America, which means across Black America, Black girls and young Black women are not receiving the billions of dollars of monies and resources to elevate them academically and athletically, which would undercut the central pinning of the school to jail pipeline. So it really is getting African American attorneys in the state and federal court to push that these Title IX fundings be flooded into the Black community the way they are flooded almost exclusively into the white community.
Thank you very much. Okay, audience questions. Please stand. We're only going to take a few. Please come up to the microphone. We need maybe the first 3 of you if we can get you in. So we have one wonderful young lady. You're listening.
What power does a student have in their own education?
I love it. What power does a student have in her own education? His or her own education. Yes, please.
You have all the power. You have all the power. For the second year, I have formed a superintendent student council student advisory council. Thank you. Where I meet with students once a month, and I sit down, I listen to their concerns, whether it be in the classroom, what's going on in their home life, what's going on in the school community. So as a superintendent and also as a teacher, I'm always a teacher first, I always empower my students to speak their power to truth. What they wanted from me as a teacher, what their hopes and dreams are in the future, and how I can put them on that road to success. Yeah. And unfortunately, every child doesn't have that type of teacher in their lives, but we as a community, we have to ensure that you have that responsible adult in front of you, and they will give your voice power.
Thank you. So you have all of the power.
And here's another power that you have. Young lady, here's another power that you have. This is the most power you can have as a person growing up, as a young child and as an adult. Develop the love for reading. That's when your power comes in.
All right, last up, it is now 8:28. Thank you. Let's give everyone a big round of applause. And I'd like to...
So while we're yet applauding, can you give our moderator who's done a phenomenal job today? Come on, let's hear it for our moderator, the lady Ama Yassin. Last but not least, I'm going to have Trustee Charles Winfro to come. He's going to give closing remarks on behalf of the village, and immediately following him will be Ms. Sharice.
No, ladies first.
You said you wanted to be last. No. All right, Sharice is coming, and then Trustee Renfro. Again, thank you everyone, to all of our panel. You did a phenomenal job. And listen, the people is asking for part 2. Not us just putting something together. So we're going to work on it a little bit. Each and every one of you did a phenomenal job in your area of expertise. And I believe that we're a richer community because of it.
Good evening. My name is Sharice Vanderhall. I'm the Executive Director of the Amistad Long Island Black Bar Association. First, I want to say thank you to my co-sponsors, NAN, the Incorporated Village of Hempstead, and the hard work that Mr. Pope and both Bishop Gates put into the program. And thank you to the panelists. Many have asked for a part 2. This isn't necessarily a part 2 to this program because there were so many issues that this panel touched on that we didn't really get into the meat and potatoes of it. One of the things we discussed was the lack of black males, right, in education. Well, we're talking about the prison to pipeline, right? Excuse me, the pipeline from preschool to prison. So we have to talk about what the barriers are and the limitations placed upon our youth once they are convicted and they get to Judge Carter, right? And then who has the discretion once they get to Judge Carter? Who comes up with those charges? What's that process? And that's one of the things that in our community we've always missed out on. Sunday, October 29th at 5 p.m. at Jackson Memorial AME Zion Church, Amistad is putting together a panel going through the entire New York State court system. What happens once you enter the system, why diversity is necessary on the bench, who has the discretion to make the charges. Judge Carter mentioned the adolescent diversion program, youthful offender programs. He's not the one that comes up with that stuff. We need to find out who has the ability and who has the power to charge our youth with such crimes, right, before they even get to him, and then what his role is once they get there. Sunday, October 29th, 5 p.m., Jackson Memorial AME Zion Church. I hope to see you there. Thank you.
What's the address?
The address is 60 Peninsula Boulevard, Hempstead. So it's at the corner of Hempstead in front where it meets the church on the right. Thank you.
We want to know about the policymakers. The policymakers are the ones making decisions. That's not about.
Good evening, everyone. It's okay if you save the best for last. I understand. You know, this was a great forum here, but the one thing that's missing to me are the young folk. I didn't see many students out in the audience. I mean, it's okay for us to talk about all these laws and everything. If we don't have the children here to understand what's going on and what we are talking about, I mean, you don't have to tell me about the laws. I'm from Alabama. But the thing of it is, we need to touch the mind of the young people, not only in this community, but all community. The brown and the black, the children that look like us, they need to be here to listen and to understand what it is that you need to do to keep yourself straight in this system. Because this thing is designed for you to fail. And we all know that. So we have to come together once and for all for a community that understand what we have to do to make certain that our children get what they deserve. Okay? On behalf of the village of Hempstead, Mayor Ryan and all the trustees, we want to thank you all for coming. And part two, I suggest that we definitely try and get some young people here. Thank you very much, and God bless all of you.